Good afternoon, everyone. It is so good to see you once again. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon as we engage another conversation entitled The Black Woman's Struggle, the intersectionality of racism and sexism. So again, thank you all so much for joining us. This conversation is for Black women, by Black women, with Black women in mind. We welcome all Black women viewers in this afternoon in this space. Thank you for being here, and we invite you to join in the conversation. Enter in and let us commune together, sharing our experiences, affirming our sisters in the struggle, and being open to new ideas and information so we all might grow, heal, and envision a new kind of possibility. The kind that is liberative, reimagine a world that is absence of racism and sexism, a hope we want for ourselves and for our daughters, biologically and otherwise. So again, welcome to this space. To all the non-Black women who are here, you too are welcome. Thank you for being here. We invite you to come not as a voyeur, but as a co-conspirator. You're invited to come in with an intentional purpose to listen for self-reflection, to ask yourself, how have I perpetuated and participated in a world that makes Black women struggle? We also then invite you to find accountability partners who are not Black women. Black women should not have to bear the struggle, try to heal, and also teach you how not to be an oppressor. Being a co-conspirator means that you find someone who's not a Black woman, who might look like you, you can enter into a covenant with, someone you can be vulnerable with, someone you can learn with. You can have deep-seated conversations and make a commitment to do the work in dismantling white supremacy and patriarchy in your community, in spaces where you occupy. So Black women and their daughters might be safe in your presence. Someone who can hold you accountable. This is what it means to be co-conspirators in this space, to listen, to learn, then to self-reflect on your part, to dismantle sexist and racist systems, behaviors, attitudes, etc. So you too might can live in a world where little Black girls are free to simply be the beautiful, magical person they were created to be. Again, you are all welcome. And as always, you are welcome and invited to post your thoughts and questions in the comment section of this post. In this space, difference of opinion and perspective is appreciated, but difference does not mean disrespect. So any comments and questions that reflect disrespect or hate will be deleted immediately. I'd like to take the opportunity to also welcome our panelists this afternoon. We have a great panelist this afternoon coming from many different walks of life and career paths, and we're so grateful to have you this afternoon. Each of them will share a little about themselves at some point in this conversation. And so let me welcome and thank each of you personally again to say, I'm so grateful to have you as my guest this afternoon as we commune together as Black women. As we get started, Tanisha, Tracy, and Dr. Moultrie will join us in a little while, so they'll turn off their cameras now. And I want to invite Esther and Yolanda to frame the conversation for us this afternoon. And to do so, I want to start by reading a quote from Bell Hooks. A quote from Bell Hooks, also known as an intersectional feminist. Here are the words from Bell Hooks. White women and Black men have it both ways. They can act as oppressor or be oppressed. Black men may be victimized by racism, but sexism allows them to act as exploiter and oppressors of women. White women may be victimized by sexism, but racism enables them to act as exploiters and oppressors of Black people. Both groups have led liberation movements that favor their interests and support the continued oppression of other groups. Black male sexism has undermined struggles to eradicate racism, just as white female racism undermines feminist struggles. As long as these two groups or any group defines liberation as gaining social equity with ruling class white men, they have a vested interest in the continued exploitation and oppression of others. The words of Bell Hooks, a feminist, intersectional feminist. Yolanda, why don't we get started with you? If you would introduce yourself, a little bit about the work you do, and help us frame this conversation in light of Bell Hooks' words.
Thanks, Cherisna. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Yolanda Norton. I am the assistant professor of Hebrew Bible and H. Eugene Farlow Chair of Black Church Studies at San Francisco Theological Seminary, but I'm on leave from there this year. I'm serving as the Black Religious Scholar Group Crump Professor of Black Theology at the Seminary of the Southwest. I am also the creator and curator of the Beyonce Mass, the womanist worship service that's focused on centering the stories and struggles of Black women as a part of God's divine story, right? So let's talk a little bit about this concept of intersectionality and why it becomes important. I think we have to really give credence to Kimberle Crenshaw, who really is the thought progenitor on a lot of this conversation about intersectionality as it pertains to Black women. But what we're talking about is the historical problem. So I have long been fascinated with the founding of the American Equal Rights Association. It was an organization founded in 1886. The primary founders of the organization were Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, Frederick Douglass, and Susan B. Anthony, right? So there's three prominent historical white women who are commonly known for their work in the suffrage movement, and Frederick Douglass, great abolitionist, Black man. What's missing from that story is the realities and the interests of Black women. The organization didn't even last very long because Douglass wanted to lead from a position of strengthening the 15th Amendment, which guaranteed, in theory, the right to vote to Black men, and wanted to say, let's hold this up. Let's make sure that we maintain the 15th Amendment and expand that to include women. These three white women wanted to do the opposite. And actually, very famously, both Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton gave remarks at a convention that was convened within this association that really typified the Black male identity, and buttress the idea of Black men as kind of brood sows. And so even though in theory these people wanted some kind of intersectional liberation, they really weren't able to carry that out in practice. And while the Black man, particularly Frederick Douglass, was able to kind of speak to and alongside of these white women, and the white women were able on some level to speak to and alongside the Black men, what's very prominent in this reality is the erasure of Black women at any point in the conversation. And so we have historically been in a moment where Black women find themselves trying to hold up the truths, the reality, the liberation of folks who are not willing to reciprocate those efforts. And so in thinking about that, I'm really compelled. I think there are two stories that I hold out in front of me in this moment that typify the realities that we're faced with today. The first being the story of Breonna Taylor, right? And holding that in tension with the stories of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery. Now, I have to say off the bat, and it's unfortunate that we have to kind of give this disclaimer, I believe that we need justice movements that name the tragedies of Black men. I do not think that there is anything lost for Black women in being advocates for Black men socially, politically, and practically. What is tragic for me is the lack of reciprocity that comes in these moments. That we saw a national groundswell around George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, and we have not seen the same level of attention being paid to the tragedy around Breonna Taylor. And so the question for me is really raised, why is it that we have the proliferation of hashtags for Black men, but we rarely know the names of Black women who are killed in similar or the same ways? It is not that Black women are not being killed by the police. It is not that Black women do not face violence on a daily basis. It's that we do not seem to have public space to hold the tragedy and the trauma that Black women are facing. So I think that is one end of the conversation. The other end of the conversation for me is one around, in particular, Kamala Harris, Senator Kamala Harris. Now, I am not in this moment trying to make a political stand about who people should support or who people should vote for. But I do think that it is interesting to note that in the conversations about whether or not Senator Harris should be the vice presidential candidate on the Democratic ticket, one of the major critiques given of her is that she's too ambitious, that she has aspirations to move beyond the vice presidency, as if that is a liability. However, I might suggest to you that I don't know anyone who has moved into the political arena without aspiration and ambition. But when those things are attached to white men or white women or Black men, we don't have a problem with ambition and forward progression. The label carries a negative connotation when it is attached to Black women in particular, as if there is something wrong with our ambition. The other word that's been used to talk about her quite often is that she's aggressive, which, for any Black woman who's ever breathed air, we know that any kind of sentiment that we carry in public spaces is labeled as aggressive. And so I think what we're seeing in this moment with particularly Senator Harris, but also with Susan Rice, is two Black women, regardless of what you think about their particular politics, but two Black women who are experienced and educated, who have particular skill sets to do a job, but who are being scrutinized on levels that white folks and Black men have not been scrutinized because of where they sit in society. And so the question is raised time and time again, how do we find space not just to protect, but to affirm Black women's identities in struggles that we have participated in for years? So it's especially engaged in the conversation that Leah Daughtry, who was formerly a planner of the Democratic National Convention, she and Donna Brazile, Yolanda Caraway, and Mignon Moore have been kind of at the forefront of these conversations, starting with their book For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Politics, and really have asked this question of what does it mean to be Black women who are prominent in the political arena. Part of what that means is, if you look at those four Black women that I just named, those are four Black women who have, on different levels, held up a political party. And part of what Leah Daughtry says is that Black women have been holding up the Democratic Party for generations. And so now it is a reckoning season where where people are responsible for making sure that Black women are not just the brood sows, the laborers who get to hold up other people's ambition. But now is the moment where Black women need to be brought to the forefront. And I would say that in doing this work, again, this is not about whether or not I think or anyone else thinks that these two women are the right Black women per se. It's about how do we have conversations about Black women that do not judge them on this using the same criteria, but weighing them unfairly and negatively in conversations. And how do those kinds of conversations prevent healing? And I'm gonna turn it over to Esther, but I will simply say this is a kind of a final moment. In looking at the work of Kimberle Crenshaw, one of the things that Crenshaw says is that she did some legal analysis of a company that will remain nameless for the moment. And the company had a series of discrimination charges brought against them from Black women. And the women couldn't gain any traction in their discrimination charges because the company could prove that they had not discriminated against Black people because they had promoted Black men. And they could prove that they hadn't discriminated against women because they had promoted white women. There was no legal standing for these Black women because they stood at the crossroads of this space. So what does it mean that we as Black women cannot find space for protection and flourishing, professionally or personally, because the system has been set up to ignore our particular realities?
Thank you so much for that. Wow, so much to dissect here. But I want to introduce Esther Armah, who will come tell us a little bit about the emotional burden, right, of this particular struggle.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Esther Armah, and I'm the Executive Director of the Armah Institute of Emotional Justice. I'm coming to you from Ghana, the motherland, West Africa. So it's actually evening here. Just watched a beautiful sunset. You can hear by my accent that I was actually born in London, where I went to school, and then lived and worked in New York before coming to Accra, Ghana, and where I've lived for 5 years. The reason that I named those 3 cities is I come to this work around Black women. I look at intersectionality as a globality as well, and the ways that Black women across continents, across cities, across oceans connect, and how those intersections are equally important as we explore and think about this notion of emotionality. It's so powerful what you said, Yolanda. First of all, thank you. Thank you so much for that brilliance and for that analysis. Who chooses Black women? Who chooses Black women? Fundamentally, Black women choose Black women. But Black women have also always chosen community. They've chosen Black men. They've chosen Black children. They've chosen Black institutions. They've chosen a Black future. They've chosen Black progress. Emotional justice is a framework that I created to specifically center Black girls and women as I explored and grappled with a legacy of untreated trauma due to our global history of systemic injustice and how that has shaped our relationships to ourselves and to each other. It shapes how we lead. It shapes how we learn. It shapes how we work. It shapes how we build. It shapes our education, our politics, our institutions, our health organizations. It shapes every facet of our lives. The importance of creating a framework was to first of all say, literally in answer to what Yolanda beautifully laid out, a system that was created that literally sits on top of Black women. Part of the dismantling of that requires us to build a framework in which our well-being, our future, our progress is centered in a very specific way. And with emotional justice, I just define it in these 2 ways. I call it a beckoning, a welcoming, an invitation, and a healing, first and foremost for Black girls and Black women. It is an intimate reckoning for and with Black men, but also an invitation. It is a dismantling for white women, and it is a dismantling and undoing and a reckoning for white men. Part of the significance of what we're dealing with, even if we look at this particular global movement of pandemic, police brutality, and global protests, the globality of the pandemic has given us a heightened sense of how systemic injustice manifests disproportionately in communities of color, but how that then is broken down when it comes to issues of gender as well as Blackness. I started by saying, who chooses Black women? When it comes to issues of race, there's always been, it's all about race. It's all about Black folks. And then for white women, it's always been, it's all about women. So when the world says to Black women, it's all about race or it's all about women, what they're saying is that it's never about you. It never centers you. It is never about your healing, your harm, your future, what you need, the deficit, and what is required to build so that you flourish. But Malcolm X has already taught us that to educate a man is to educate an individual, and to educate a woman is to educate a nation. So that it only makes sense then that I create a framework like emotional justice that literally centers Black women. Understanding this, healed, flourishing Black women create healed, flourishing Black communities, Black institutions, not just Black institutions, institutions, communities, and nations. The legacy of colonialism, I'm sitting here in Ghana and reckoning with that. The legacy of enslavement, I lived in New York for 8 years, was witness to that. The legacy of apartheid, I worked in South Africa. The legacy of anti-Blackness created what I call the emotional economy. And the emotional economy was this space. We think of economies in fiscal and financial terms, but the emotional economy is, how do you weaponize emotions to cater to and serve the fragile masculinity, the toxicity of white men? The reason that it matters that we make those kinds of definitions is that the nature of those systems of colonialism, of enslavement, of apartheid, the nature of the power that they created is, for white men, they only understand power in relationship to subjugation and exploitation of another people. There is never this sense of feeling empowered. In other words, in your body, in your spirit, in yourself, you feel power. Their relationship to power is rooted in subjugation, inequality, exploitation. They feel powerful because you, Black man, Black woman, Black girl, Black boy, does not have equity, doesn't have similar power. And so how does that translate emotionally? Let's think about vulnerability. Part of what this pandemic has revealed is the heightened vulnerability of Black people, but that is also gendered. Here in Ghana, we've had a major outcry with our nurses not just not having PPE, but being guilted, being given this kind of sermonizing about an African woman being willing to go in and risk life and save. And the idea that we are all in it together is a mantra, but the expectation that it's Black women who will risk every single thing, and not just their lives, because they also are coming from families and communities, and they go back to risk the lives of others. We've seen that reality here on the ground in Accra. I lived and worked in London as a journalist. In the NHS, that's the National Health Service, that's the UK's big healthcare institution. You have immigrant nurses from Nigeria, from Zimbabwe, from Jamaica. And you'll hear the stories of the nature of the legacy of colonialism in those spaces creates what I call a racialized emotionality. That means they are vulnerable to converging pandemics. They're vulnerable because of the nature of systemic injustice and institutional racism. So they're more on the front line because of the nature of the way systemic poverty plays out. So they're more likely to be on the front line. The nature of the way racism works, and then the legacy of colonialism, and particularly British anti-Blackness, is a very specific type of silencing and fear. And so you'll see Black nurses who are literally frightened to speak up about how vulnerable they are because of what they risk and what they might lose as a result of using their voices. Audre Lorde taught us that your silence will not protect you. What I say in emotional justice is the silence was never intended to protect Black girls and women. The silence was about the protection so often of men, white and Black, and so often of white women. But it was so rarely about you. Let's go back to this notion of vulnerability. The idea of Black women being in this space of racialized emotionality, that's where you take an emotion like vulnerability, which is disproportionately true with these converging pandemics, the heightened disproportionality of Black people testing positive for COVID, dying from COVID, the heightened reality of the systemic brutality of the police. Yolanda spoke beautifully about the erasure, the lack of focus of Black women. So vulnerable to erasure, vulnerable to violence, vulnerable to a silencing within a pandemic as well as within a brutality, and then looking at that globally, intersecting these global dots between Accra and London and cities and all across the United States. When I talk about racialized emotionality, I'm speaking about the notion of an emotion that you add color, context, and consequence. So anybody, and so many of us, of course, have felt vulnerable because of the pandemic and the way that it has upended people's worlds. We've heard parents talk about homeschooling kids. We've heard story after story after story. But when you put vulnerability in the context of race, you're looking at how Black people are disproportionately impacted as a result of COVID. But then you add gender to that and you look at the way that is manifest again, these converging, intersecting pandemics that target Black women in these particular ways. So you're talking about an emotion, vulnerability, adding color, adding brown and Blackness to that emotion, that's the color. The context, legacies of colonialism, legacies of apartheid, legacies of enslavement, and how they manifest in these institutions, that's the context. What is the consequence? That we die faster. Even as we die, we're silenced. Even as our corpses are riddled with bullets, we have to shout to be heard, to be seen, to be hashtagged in ways that other people are. So it is looking at those, what I call global intersections of untreated trauma across geographical boundaries and borders that makes emotional justice so important. Emotional justice, because in the same way that Black bodies have been pathologized in so many ways, our hearts, our spirits, our healing is a justice project. It is much more than an individual healing. That this is an institutional, collective, global need that is urgent, that needs to happen right now. So emotional justice is first and foremost for Black girls and Black women, because we recognize and we honor, and our history has taught us that it is in our healing that there can be a global wellness that is both systemic, collective, communal, and global. Without that, we literally are watching the perishing happen as we speak. Part of what emotional justice requires us to reckon with, we call it an intimate reckoning. And that is the complexity of Blacknesses between us, African people here on the continent, African people in the diaspora, African Americans, Black British, Black in the Caribbean. We have a complexity in our Blacknesses as a result of the legacies of the systemic injustice and the way that it has impacted and shaped our trauma with our relationship to each other. But that doesn't change the way the system targets all of us in order to destroy what is so powerful and so beautiful. So part of what is necessary and part of what we do with emotional justice is to say that we recognize the peculiarity and the particularity of our Blacknesses. We recognize the complexity, but we recognize that anti-Blackness and systemic white supremacy takes no account of that. We must, because we honor each other in our beauty. We're sitting here looking at different shades and the melanin, and all of these tell stories about history. So we acknowledge that, whilst we recognize that systemic white supremacy does not. So that when we're thinking of solutions, when we talk about emotional justice, I mean Black women in Ghana, Black women in the Caribbean, Black women in Britain, Black women all across the United States, Black women in Brazil, Black women in Latin America. And it's very important that that global call and invitation is made so that we name ourselves where we have so often been silenced or erased as a result of the systems that continue to dominate. And I'll close with this. The intimate reckoning for us, both as women and as Black people. That Black women and Black men love each other is a complicated truth rooted in these profoundly devastating, brutal histories where we have had to save each other's lives in all kinds of ways that are extraordinary. I call it, between us, there are the unshed tears of the Middle Passage. And the ways that we love each other are complex and complicated. Part of the healing that is required between us is to recognize there can be no future of a healed, flourishing Blackness when there is this privileging around gender. Because we understand you didn't get out of the plantation by yourself. It's never happened. I'm sitting in Ghana. My tribe is Ashanti. It's a matrilineal tribe. So it's rooted in the power of women. I was telling colleagues and friends this when Beyonce dropped Black is King, and they were talking about the gender issue. I said, yes, but look at the beauty in that. I'm Ashanti. In our tribe, for you as a man to become a king, you have to be chosen by a woman. The power of that is to say to us, you have always needed each other for the fullest liberation. And you cannot do leadership alone and expect to go as far as you can possibly go. So the intimate reckoning is for us to deal with the untreated trauma of what we both had to go through, singular and particular, as a result of plantations in America, as a result of apartheid in South Africa, as a result of colonialism all across West Africa, Francophone Africa, and in the UK. And the legacy of that untreated trauma should never make us look at each other and brace ourselves for a fight when we look into each other's eyes. What we need to do is stand shoulder to shoulder and say the fight is the way that white supremacy has always used division as its most powerful tool. So we need not pick it up and weaponize it against each other. So I end with saying the future is emotional justice, and emotional justice centers the full healing, the well-being, and the flourishing of Black girls and Black women globally. And that too is our intersectionality.
Wow, thank you both for framing the conversation. I want to invite our audience members, again, remind you to write your comments or questions, post them there in the comment section so that you might engage our panelists. Let me invite the other panelists to join us at this time. Dr. Monique Moultrie, Tanisha Smith, and Tracy Ray, if you will join us. And Dr. Moultrie, I want to start with you because, you know, Cardi B and Megan Stallion and dropped the video this weekend, and it was almost as if all hell broke loose in every which way because the audacity of Black women celebrating their bodies, centering themselves, and having and calling a kind of agency to their own sexuality, absence of a man. I mean, I just thought, you know, all hell broke loose. So help us frame, would you enter into this conversation, helping us understand the complexities around decentering men as it relates to our bodies and also sexuality?
Sure. Thank you so much for the invitation, and to my sisters who've gone, I thank you for the framing. I'm, as Cherisna said, an associate professor of religious studies at Georgia State, which is in Atlanta, Georgia. And so my day job is I teach about religion, gender, and sexuality studies, and race. And I love how you asked me to enter the conversation, because that's actually how I plan to end. So I'm gonna flip my notes as I'm looking at the screen. So I think it is an interesting moment. One, because my own research has really been focused on Black women's sexual agency and what does it mean to claim a sexual self as a Black woman. And for me, that lies at that intersection that we're talking about of racism and sexism. Because for many, because of the legacy of slavery and because of the stereotypes associated with Black women's bodies and their presumed hypersexuality, there wasn't such a thing as sexual agency. It was presumed that Black women were always sexually available and always were protruding and showing off their sexuality. And so when we look at this display in the video, on one hand, you see people saying, see, this is what we're talking about. These are the stereotypes being reiterated. But I think that this conversation happens every generation. When we had the 1920s and 1930s, the flappers, you had people going in the Black community, see, this is what we're talking about. This is what we're fighting against. This is what they say we are, and what they're telling others is the accurate representation. And I think the pendulum switches in either direction. You either go too far to one side and say, oh no, that is not who we are, and that's just a small subset, and those aren't our people. That is people who weren't raised right. There's that moralizing that happens.
That's right, that's right.
Or I think there is, that largely also happens within the Black community, where it's Black women saying, oh, no, they're not my daughters. That wouldn't be what I'd raise my daughter to be. And yet at the same point, we are being raised to understand ourselves as wonderfully created, as God-given and gifted, and that we're fully divine and fully body. And so when you hear women talk about their bodies in affirming ways, even if that differs in how one would choose to do so themselves, I think it's an interesting moment, because I think we forget how far we keep reiterating these same messages. I think largely also because my research is focused on Black women's celibacy. So women who are choosing not to be sexually active, that research is really pushed against this notion that we are just out for sexual pleasure. And I was Facebook haunting, I was looking at a couple posts, and someone asked Dr. Courtney Bryant, she asked, what is the telos? What is the end result of them asking for sexual pleasure? Like, okay, the video didn't hit for me, it wasn't all the things, but beyond that, beyond them asking for sexual pleasure, what's the moral of the story? What's the point of what we're celebrating? And as a sexual ethicist, I pause there and I go, maybe pleasure is the point. Maybe it doesn't need to be an additive point beyond that. Maybe the reclaiming of sexual pleasure from a perspective of a Black woman is in fact the goal, to talk about our sexual freedom as unique and as authentic and as a gift to ourselves, not to someone else. So as much as I read the lyrics, because when I heard them, I heard the cleaner version, so I wasn't really sure what I was hearing. So I got the explicit lyrics so that I could read what they were saying. And so I'm not so sure that this is a song that isn't centered around male pleasure, because it is a very heterosexual song. It is really speaking about heterosexual sexual pleasure, which is fine. Hey, do you? But I think that when we look at it more expansively and think about how do we push against it from both a racist and anti-racist and anti-sexist perspective, we've also got to talk about what highlighting sexual pleasure does for one's own self-worth, for one's own value, for one's own sense of bodily autonomy, and highlight that. I think I'll close where I had planned to start, which is to talk about the ways in which these things are always intertwined. And so you had asked us to think of a story, and the story that I was going to talk about was, I'm a teacher. And so in one of my classes, I had a student who made a website devoted to my class that was full of caricatures of my body. My hips were as wide as the screen. And I'm a hippie Black girl, so, but I do think he took extremes to pinpoint my Black body. There was something about my female body that was a problem for him, because he didn't act in the same way towards the men of color in our faculty. He didn't act the same way against the white women female faculty. So there was something about my particular performance that was problematic for him. And for me, I'll highlight again, I'll bring up Sister Audre Lorde, because in addition to saying our silence won't protect us, she also says there's no hierarchy in our oppressions. So there's this sense that these things are always intertwined. So I can't say to my department chair, who's a white woman, there's a problem because of my femaleness, because she's a white woman and she's not experiencing that. I can't say to my colleagues of color, hey, this is a problem because he's racist, because they're people of color and they're not experiencing that. So there's something about that intertwining of my identity that was the problem. And to untangle that is the work that we have to do. And as a woman, a scholar, I think we're called to do holistic justice. I really like the term Sister Esther gave of emotional justice, because I've been doing a lot of work on holistic justice, which is the sense that beyond all of our isms, our heterosexism, our racism, classism, et cetera, ageism, there's this sense of what does justice look like? What does freedom look like? What does liberation look like? And for me, that is the end result. So if ultimately I'm pushing for sexual pleasure, it's because my end result ultimately is liberation. What are the steps that will get us to be liberated? So I think I'll stop there.
Great, thank you so much. I appreciate the storytelling, because at Scarritt Bennett Center, our way, one of our tenets is storytelling. We believe that the lived experiences of people has authority. And so we invite these last two women to share personal stories that they have around this particular struggle, racism and sexism. Tanisha Smith, we'll start with you. If you would tell us a little bit about who you are and share your story.
Hi, everyone. As Cherisna said, I am Tanisha Smith, and I have been an IT professional as well as a consultant for over 10 years. We all know IT is not an arena where Black women are heavily represented. And so I want to share a little bit of my story. I graduated and entered the consulting world in 2008 amidst the subprime housing crisis. And I, like many people, after a year, found myself jobless and trying to figure out what was next. And during that time, I received a ton of solicited and unsolicited advice. And two pieces of advice stayed with me. I did not follow these two pieces of advice, but I want to highlight them here. The first piece of advice was to change my name on my resume to my middle name, because my name, T-A, capital N-I-S-H-A, was obviously Black. And that I would get more interviews and looks if my resume presented less Black. The second piece of advice was to grow my hair just a little, because at that time, and most of the time, I rock a short Caesar. And I was told that that could present as aggressive in the corporate world, and I should soften my look just a little bit. I think it's important to note that these two pieces of advice came to me from Black men. I don't know what had happened in these brothers' lives where they thought the path to success was paved by compromising themselves, but I knew that this was not my path. I knew that if the corporate world was going to be my chosen path, that I would be entering an environment every day where I was not set up to succeed. And I knew that I had to put on my full armor, which was my true self, which is how and when I feel whole and most confident in order to walk through and be my most successful self in that environment. I knew this would be a difficult path, but I also didn't know then, I can frame it now, I was operating from a model of abundance rather than a model of scarcity and lack. And so I forged forward, and fast forward a few years later, I'm sitting in a leadership meeting. I've just begun with a new company. I'm 2 weeks into my tenure, and a white male exec asked me a question that he knows that I should not, could not, and would not have the answer to. I looked across the table, and two of my other white male colleagues were laughing to themselves. in that moment, I knew that I was setting the tone for how I would be perceived, because Black women are under the microscope. And I stopped and I took a beat and I looked him directly in his eyes. And I can't remember what I said, but I know that whatever I said something to let him know that I knew what he was doing. And I calmly directed him to someone who knew the answer to the question. But I walked out of that meeting knowing that every day I walked into that building, every day I walked into that job, I would be walking through fire. But I also knew, rather than walking away disempowered, I knew that in that moment he was trying to disempower me. But I also knew that he saw me and he knew that he had to knock me down a peg immediately. This was 2 weeks into my tenure. I knew that he saw a bald Black woman named Tanisha, T-A, capital N-I-S-H-A, who was sitting in the same meeting as he. And he knew that if I was there, I was a powerful woman. So there are 2 things that I have learned and 2 lessons that I take away from those 2 scenarios. The first one is this: never accept, receive, or seek advice from people who do not share your values. The second piece of advice that I have, the second thing that I learned, the second lesson that I learned is, if someone is seeking to disempower you, that means that they see your power. And so you need to discern what it is that they see and make that a part of your superpowers. And I know for me, part of my superpowers is walking in my true self, because people fear how they're perceived by other people, and they fear standing out. But standing out is how you rise. And for me, any success that I attain being my true self, that's what I value. And so my path may not be the path for everyone, but it's the path that I've chosen because it makes me feel whole. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tanisha, for that very powerful story. And what I was thinking about when you were telling the story is, Black women are always told, in order for you to be the most successful, the most desirable, the most beautiful, you have to look more white. Right. Mm-hmm. And so thank you. And we're also put in a position when when racism or even sexism is in the boardroom, we're put in a position to de-escalate, right? So that we're not the ones who are called aggressive when aggression is already in the room, right? The offense has already happened, but we're given the responsibility to navigate offense by not offending the one who's already put offense in the room. Right. Mm-hmm. And so thank you for naming that. I mean, there's a whole lot of amens and ashes in the comments with your story. So thank you so much for sharing that. Next, we have Tracy Ray. Tracy Ray, won't you introduce yourself and share your story?
Absolutely. Well, first, thank you, Cherisna and Scarritt Bennett, for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. I feel like I am sitting on Friday happy hours with girlfriends, processing our week, our experiences of the day, which is therapy. And so I'm thankful for this therapy session on this Sunday. Like as Cherisna said, my name is Tracy Ray. I am in higher education, specifically student affairs, and have been for the last 20 years, the majority of my professional career. I currently work at a predominantly white institution within the Division of Dean of Students. And so some of my experiences, I think, are what bring me to this conversation today. And now as I sit in a place as an administrator, but also someone responsible for hiring, recruiting, and maintaining a diverse staff that reflects our society, I see challenges regularly, moment to moment. In addition, I am seeking my doctorate and I'm working on my studies. And my studies are rooted in the power and privilege concept, or the lack of power and privilege for marginalized individuals in higher education, specifically focused on staff and personnel. And So I find myself as a student, as an administrator, as a colleague, as a friend, sitting at this table and again, doing a lot of amens because y'all are clicking on things that really, really are hitting me in the chest. And so one of the stories, very similar to Tanisha's story, I found myself when I got a promotion sitting in leadership circles that I hadn't sat in before. I'm the only brown face, and I'm definitely the only brown female face in these spaces. So our leadership in our department is made up of directors and 2 senior directors. And in that situation, there's roughly 10 of us. We're in the meeting, our weekly meeting, having a conversation about budgetary things. And one of the white female directors is speaking of something that would directly harm the forward movement of my unit. So I speak up. And for those who know me, I tend to be kind of glass half full kind of person. I'm pretty positive for the most part, or try to find the positive in that. But I started to learn some things as I sit in these spaces, and this is just one small example. So I disagree. I respectfully disagree. And for some reason, my disagreeing really, really impacted this person. And so her voice elevates, mine stays pretty much the same. As a matter of fact, it was roughly about how I'm speaking to the group now. And as she got more and more elevated, very visibly upset, and I'm saying, listen, I just disagree with you. This is not intended to upset you. I'd love for us to continue to talk about something, an in-between solution. I'm not trying to upset you. The white male looks at me and says, now don't get angry. And I remember thinking, so is that, you're directing that at me, but the person who's physically angry in the space is this white female across the table who has stood up at this point, and I'm sitting. And I'm thinking, so surely he meant that towards both of us, right? However, no, he only meant it towards me. And at that moment, I thought, you know, this is when you recognize that you experience a space very differently than the space experiences you. So how I'm viewing myself and my participation in this room is very different than how the room is experiencing me. And definitely very isolating in the sense that there was nobody who jumped up to my defense to protect me emotionally, which I love, Esther. When you were saying it, I'm thinking absolutely connecting to that, as I'm sure many of the folks in our audience today connect to. And I was thinking of this specific scenario. I did not feel emotionally safe, and I technically didn't feel physically safe as she stood up. Although in my mind, I thought if she gets froggy, I have a particular reaction to that. But still not safe, right? Not safe. And I'd have to act upon something that would take me out of my complete character. As those who know me know that is just not how I roll. So in that moment, I was very conscious of that. And he, of course, although he's not my direct supervisor, has an authoritative role by title. And I remember thinking, wow, I just got angry Black woman. And it's completely opposite of who I am. I additionally remember thinking, wow, I've heard this said before, but when white women cry, the world cries with them. And I'm watching it right now as he dove across the table to make sure that I didn't get angry. She can get as angry as she'd like to. And so I remember thinking that, and I also remember thinking the concept of don't scare the white people, right? What is my action here? And what's my training in my life that would tell me how I diffuse this situation, but stand up for myself and hold people in the space accountable? How do I do that? What training do I have? What experience do I have to be able to do that? So all these things were flooding. And it's interesting to me because when you sit in this space, as all of you have said, and you're functioning as a woman, I call it a double minority. And then you can add to that, right? So I'm sitting in this space. I have no ally, no visible allies in this space. And the allies I may have are thinking, wow, this isn't right. But they aren't even comfortable to speak up on my behalf. And they definitely don't hold my identities in this scenario. And I remember thinking, I'm tired. I'm tired. I'm tired of having to defend myself for something so minute on a regular basis. And it's all the small battles every day at work and personally But specifically, I'm using a work example. I'm tired. And then I'm hearing all that's happening in our world. This was before COVID, of course, but I'm hearing that and I'm thinking I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I get the concept and I see it in my workspace and it's registering with me. And you go home and have to really process that and come down with that and develop your tactics for survival, for emotional health and emotional safety. And so I remember thinking that, and that led me to a place when I entered into my doctorate of really doing the research on what the marginalized experiences specifically at predominantly white institutions, and for me at predominantly white institutions in the South. And so exploring that, considering the concept of why I see a lot of my colleagues who look like me, why am I, as a Black woman, which there are many Black women in the field of higher education, so why do I feel so alone? Why am I in this space by myself? Because as you move up, that number shrinks quickly. And when we are promoted to leadership positions, it is the biggest victory on the planet. And to your point, I think, Yolanda, you'd mentioned this, when we see promotions at that level, they are Black men, and rarely are they Black women. And if they're Black women, they don't sustain, or they're interim and then replaced by another person of color, and typically it's a man. And so visualizing this, it sends me a lot of messages from the institutions that I work at. And some people say, well, why do you stay? Why don't you go to HBC or whatnot? And oftentimes I think, because if not me, then whom? If not us, then whom? Who stays here to represent and support the students who come into these spaces who are also marginalized? If we don't stay, who's there for them? Where they can see individuals who look like them and who will ride for them in these environments where they are going to experience their greatest life stress up to that point. So that's oftentimes why I stay. But it's interesting because as I entered into my research and in my dissertation, I'm again looking at the lived experiences of minorities on predominantly white campuses as staff members, not as faculty or students. There's significant research in those domains, even though there always needs to be more, and there needs to be more action upon that research, right? But in speaking about staff members, I look at my first title, my submission of my title and my subject, and the backlash that I got before COVID and before the resurgence of Black Lives Matter. And now that Black Lives Matter has resurged, I'm getting a lot of support that, yeah, you can move forward with this topic of delving into race. And I'm using critical race theory, which is really an exploration in storytelling, to Cherisna's point. And I really have a lot of appreciation for the kind of rich information we can get from people's stories. And so when I'm delving in now, I'm not getting any pushback. As a matter of fact, I'm getting a lot of support to go a little deeper, to go a little harder. So I find it interesting that we're able to capitalize on some things that within a year ago, I was told, I don't know if you want to go into this institution and tell them they have a racism issue, right? You'll never make it through the institutional review board with a topic like that, right? And now it's go harder. And I'm thinking, wow, what a difference a year makes. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but that's a lot of things that bring me to this table. I'm just honored to learn from you all. And I think of one of the things that I'm exploring and writing on is this concept of feared versus ignored. And oftentimes with the focus groups that I lead, when I ask that one simple question, do you feel most of the time, if you had to choose between feared or ignored, do you feel feared or ignored? When I ask that to Black and Brown staff members and students, the women say ignored and the men say feared. And it's interesting how that drives the relationships that we see come from those two concepts, that something so thing can be so critical to how we communicate and support one another. So the kinds of things that play in my head when we have these conversations, and specifically my role as a student advocate, but also as someone who's trying to bring in other team members of diverse backgrounds, and not just surface diversity, right? Not just color, skin, hair, yada, yada, but ableism, age, all those other things that we also don't talk about that impact the people's experiences regularly. So thank you again for bringing me to this table, Cherisna. I am honored and humbled, and yeah, ready to mix up some more.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I want to remind our audience to write your questions or comments down in our comment section in the post so that we might engage you. As we're telling stories, and I'm listening to Tracy's story and Tanisha's and Monique's, I thought of the story that I'd like to share. I'm an ordained minister in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, but before I got ordained, was interning as youth pastor at a local church while I was in school. And when I came to that church, no one liked me, and I couldn't understand why. I'm a likable person, and I loved what I did, and passionate about being, a youth minister at the time, loved the students. The children. I just always had a passion and love for youth ministry, and so could not understand why I was not making a connection with the youth leaders, particularly at the time. And so during my one-on-one time with the pastor, who was a Black man, he said, and we were talking about these particular challenges, and what he said to me was this. He said, "You are Black, nappy, and loud. That shakes people in the South." And at the time, I was so shocked by the audacity of his words. But I also did not realize at the time that those words were planted seeds within me, where I began to carry, and it grew, and it became a kind of seed that allowed for me to continue to question my being, my presentation, and my worth in every space. So I'm consistently questioning, is my hair okay? Did I speak too loud when I disagreed in the boardroom, Tracy? Right? Should I lighten my foundation, my makeup, so that my skin doesn't come too dark? Because, dark women are angry and aggressive. And so what are ways for me to soften my Blackness in all of my being so that other people can be comfortable? Consistently questioning my very being, because for me, I was given the burden, a seed that told me I was too loud, too nappy, and too Black, and that scared people in the South. These are the experiences of Black women, and we carry these stories, these experiences, these seeds that are planted, and we're constantly having to navigate male spaces and white spaces. And oftentimes those male spaces are Black spaces. So if I can't be safe and be my own self, my own natural, beautiful self in Black spaces, because I'm not white enough, where can Black women be? And so I want to invite Yolanda and all of the women, we can start with Yolanda or Esther, but let's move into what healing looks like for women, Black women. If I'm too Black and nappy, if I'm too Black and too nappy and loud in a Black church, where can I be?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so here's the unfortunate reality about this too, Cherisna, is that that happened with you with a Black male pastor. It is maybe just as likely that if you had been sitting in front of a Black woman, she would have said the same thing to you.
Probably.
What we don't talk about is the ways in which Black women have learned to internalize those things, right? So there was some Black woman at some point who was told the same thing, and not only did she learn to try to modulate and monitor that in herself, but she learned to police it in other young Black women. So I think part of what we have to do is to name the ways in which, out of our own kind of emotional trauma around racism and sexism, we then perpetuate those things on other Black women. Do you talk the way that I talk? Does your hair look the way that mine looks, right? So even kind of my thing is that when I started in the PhD program, I wanted to lock my hair. And I was told by other Black people, don't do that until you've gotten a job. right? That it presents a kind of Afrocentric aesthetic that is uncomfortable for not even just white folks, but there are other Black folks, particularly in kind of regional capacities, that that are not going to be comfortable if you kind of own a particular Afrocentricity. So I mean, I think that's one piece, is like to talk about how it is we learn these behaviors from Black men, from white folks, and then we become the agents of harm for other Black women because we haven't done our own work and our own healing. I think part of the healing for me is in the agency, right? So in thinking about what Esther said earlier, I was also reminded of another kind of anecdote that Kimberle Crenshaw offers. She says that, like, in doing legal research, that she found that the federal government funding that she was able to find for Black people by and large went to initiatives around Black men, right? And so she got really excited when she finally found an initiative that was for Black women, until she realized that it was for Black women in Europe and Africa. And so there is a way in which people are comfortable with the idea of Black women, but not with the reality. It's easy, right, to do charity. I don't even want to say affirm, but to do a particular kind of charity when you do not have to encounter and engage the realities of Black women. So I say that in part because one of my questions for Esther is really about how do we name global intersectional racism? Because I am often hearing from Black women in Europe or Black women in Africa, those are American problems. And so wanting to engage that, but also to say, like, the healing is to, as Tanisha said, to show up in spaces as your authentic self, to learn to affirm that, and to be mindful that there are consequences of that that come with being your authentic self, but not to shrink behind those consequences. So, I'm really good for when people name, oh gosh, just the angry Black woman. I'm so scared, for saying, like, well, let's deconstruct why I'm angry. Let's not pretend that this emotion is not rooted in a reality and is not a response to the hostility that I am experiencing on some level every day and in extreme moments, right? Like situationally. This is not an abstraction. This is my humanity coming forth, and I'm entitled to my humanity to exist in this space.
Powerful, powerful. Thank you so much, Yolanda. One of the things that we say, so emotional justice is a framework, and we've developed ideas, phraseology, language around identifying and defining all these different things. And one of the things we talk about specifically with Black women and with Black people is that we say that we as Black women, we as Black people, we are in an intimate relationship with multiple intersecting violences. We are in an intimate relationship with multiple intersecting violences. Because here's the simple truth is no Black woman ever got stronger by being less herself. It's never happened. No Black woman won, and when I mean won, I'm talking about freedom and liberation, ever by being less herself. That it was always in being your full self that you find some liberation. Now, of course, the issue is the definition of liberation has been tied to a white supremacist reality. So liberation is how far are you up in that particular ladder? How far do you sit in that boardroom? Who do you sit next to and who sits next to you? And so I think it's really important. I love, Yolanda, that you talked about the notion of this, I call it the separation of our Blacknesses, and the importance of us as Black women not doing what white supremacy has done to our Blackness, which is to have this notion that there is the American Blackness is different than a British Blackness, which is different than the legacy of colonialism on the continent. I speak as somebody who was born in London. I am Black British and claim both. I lived in New York for 8 years and worked in a radio station that was dealing with all of that, the reality of racism and anti-Blackness within the American context. And I now live in Accra. And what is really clear, white supremacy always wins when Black people think that we're gonna negotiate the nature of our oppression with each other, as opposed to confront white supremacy and say, the work is to dismantle you and to hold my sister Yolanda's hand, to hold my sister Tanisha's hand, to hold my sister Cherisna's hands, to hold my sister's hands and say, okay, sis, how do we do this? How do we do this? Because what I say, and I say this to Black women on the continent because I do this work here, we have to negotiate, we call it negotiating with our own resistance. The resistance to recognize that my Blackness and your Blackness is one Blackness. And yes, there are geographical borders. There are the particularities and the peculiarities of our Blackness that matter to us, that are part of our tradition and our culture, where we come from. All of those things are to be celebrated. But to be really clear, we all know this. If you are walking on a street in London or in Brooklyn or in Brixton and the police roll up and all of us sit together, nobody is more or less safe because I happen to have been born in London and you all were born somewhere else in America. Like, we all know that that is not the truth. And so, you know, a major part of our healing for me, the naming is really important. To your story, that we call it emotional patriarchy. And emotional patriarchy is where we've created a system where the idea is that everybody caters to the feelings of white men, their sadness, their anger, their vulnerability, their pain. And for Black people, our pain is collectivized and identified as collective. So every Black woman knows what an angry Black woman is. Whether you live in Accra, whether you live in London, or whether you live in, everybody knows that phrase. And you know that it is specific to your Blackness and to your womanness. It's a very specific thing. Just as brothers know about being the feared Black man. Everybody in the world has felt fear at some point. But again, it comes to this racialized emotionality, this system, this emotional economy that condemns you for your humanity. And so the reason emotional justice becomes really important is that we treat our humanity, our feelings as Black people, as Black women, as a justice project that requires strategy and structure, that is to be institutionalized, that requires policy, that requires funding. Because if we don't recognize that not just our feelings matter, but that they are an issue of politics, they are an issue of justice, it becomes this notion where we talk about being all up in our feelings. But that's just not true, because all of us have told stories that circle and interconnect. One of the things I always remember, since we're all talking stories, I was a radio host in New York. I was born in London, so I have a British accent. So when you hear me on the radio, that's what you hear. You can't see me. And I always remember this. Whenever I met white people anywhere at an event anywhere, they would say to me, "Oh, you sound just like that host of that show in New York. I just won a big award." He said, "Oh yeah, she just won a big award." I said, "I sound like her?" And they said, "Oh yes, she's British." And so I said, "She's British?" And so it couldn't be me. And they said, "Well, I mean, you sound just like her. But you know, she's British." I was like, "Oh, okay." And then they, you know, that thing when white people know the thing that is unspoken is Blackness and they don't want to say it. And I'm like, I'm just gonna watch you curl yourself into knots, trying to avoid dealing with the fact that obviously I'm her. You just don't want to say that, "Oh, shoot, we didn't think that you were Black and British." Do you know what I mean? And so I want to close with saying that our fundamental work, our privileging of our work has to be our healing. That in naming what I call emotional patriarchy, that there is a specific dismantling that has to happen. Why is there such a thing as white tears when everybody cries? White tears are a signal to every Black person that you are about to be in some real trouble unless you de-escalate this scenario. It all comes back to the legacy of colonialism, comes back to the legacy of apartheid, comes back to the plantation, where you had to watch for the emotionality of the white slave master and the white slave mistress, because that was a live or die reality. The legacy of the untreated trauma from those spaces means that it manifests in its contemporary spaces, whether it's an academic institution or corporation, a technology company, a justice institution. It manifests now where there is still the expectation that Black women take care of other people's feelings. And emotional justice, we talk about white people have emotional mammy issues. Emotional mammy issues. You're an emotional mammy. So the expectation that I, as a Black woman, cater to, take care of, and make you comfortable in your egregious, harmful behavior, no matter the cost or consequence to me, because that's the only way that I get out of this safe. And I have to be safe in my unsafety, because it's not true that taking care of your feelings necessarily makes me safe. And unpacking all of that complexity matters. And just again, to put it in a global context, part of what it matters that we understand, and I say this to my sisters here on the continent, there is this illusion that because we have majority Black spaces all the time, that the legacy of colonialism somehow doesn't manifest. And I would say it manifests in our intra-Black relationships with each other. Manifests in how we engage each other, whether we're Black people on the continent or Black people in America. It matters in how we engage each other. It matters in the way that we do business. The emotional economy that is the result of the legacies of colonialism and enslavement that created these intimate relationship with multiple types of violence. One of those violences is how we see each other as Black people. So when Kimberle Crenshaw says, yes, I can find something to fund for Black women in Europe or Africa, it's to do with white people's relationship to Blackness from that space. That's why, again, it is in your nappiness, it's in my nappiness, it's in my twist. That's the thing that made me most powerful. To speak really honestly as well, as somebody who also worked in institutions, I remember the institutional feelings of compromising in order to try and make myself more appealing, more amenable, to enable and speed up my promotional possibilities, because the idea that we don't want to succeed or be ambitious is just a nonsense. The price of that is what white supremacy teaches you, that the price of that is some part of yourself. And so I love your story, Tanisha, about your power was actually in holding yourself up. Because again, nobody got free by being more white. Never happened.
Nobody.
Never happened. Never happened. Future is emotional justice, for sure.
The future is emotional justice. Yes, ma'am. There are some questions that are coming in, so I want us to be able to engage the audience. This first question I really think has already been answered, but I want to acknowledge it and invite other women who feel led to respond to this question. And I want to also acknowledge that many of the women, Black women, who are in the audience are sharing stories in the comments. And I want to say thank you for sharing your stories. We hear you, we see you, and we believe you. Sharing your stories. I believe everything you're saying right here in these comments, because oftentimes we're in these spaces where we don't have the ability to share our stories. And when we do share them, oftentimes it's met with, that's not true. I don't believe you. And so I want the women who are sharing, who are using this space to share, I want to first say thank you and also affirm your experiences. So here's the first question. How can we equip Black women? Dr. Moultrie, how can we equip Tanisha, who's in the IT world? How can we equip Black women, Tracy in higher ed, to operate in these spaces to assist with us not carrying these seeds with us that can be traumatizing and cause one to not be their authentic self? Tanisha, I think you really spoke to that in your stories, but I think kind of what they're asking is, how do we affirm and celebrate women and encourage women to be their authentic self, even in spaces that says you too Black?
Well, I have found power. My power lies in resistance. Because like I said, I'm walking into a space that was not built for me to succeed. So if I chip away at my soul every day to belong in that space, where does that leave me? Because this is not my space. I didn't build this space, but I owe it to myself to keep my soul intact. So you owe it to yourself to save yourself every single day. And I say this instead of complying, deny. Just deny it. Shake it off. Because when you show up as your true self, you're dangerous. Everything that you fear and you're compromising to gain, you can gain being yourself. It's just harder. I can't say that it's easy. And you may be denied opportunities. But wherever you arrive is where you're destined to arrive, because no one, when you are your true and full self, no one can deny what's yours. But if you chip away at who you are, you're missing out on what's meant for you.
That's good.
So
yeah,
that's what I say.
Yeah, others.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
Can I-
in the comment section that talks about, I'm just so tired. Can we talk a little bit about the exhaustion, right? The exhaustion of this struggle, what we carry, the ways we have to navigate in these spaces, the ways where we have to, manage ourselves, right?
Right.
So that other people, right? There were some comments that people were saying they begin to emulate how white men behave, right? So that they're not stirring the pot. Black women are tired. Can we speak to that exhaustion?
Yeah, I want to chime in there because one of the things I've been doing this summer, especially since Black Lives Matter has picked up in protests, it has meant that I have the luxury or curse of being several white women's Black friend. And what that has meant is a sense of like, let me ask you about this. Let me ask you to help me with this. Let me ask you for resources for this. I am not Black Google, and yet I get put in that position.
Yeah.
And so sometime around June, I started to reclaim my time and say that publicly, say that to them in the midst of a meeting I agreed to be in. You know what? We're not going anywhere, and I'm reclaiming my time today. And what you want is a simple solution, and we're not getting there because I'm telling you, you need to do these things, and you want to do 4 other things that aren't those things. So you go do that. I'm reclaiming my time. And I've really grown in the power of that, of really saying, I'm not just going to be tired because I worked on your projects and your problem. I'm going to be tired because I worked on my own stuff that was tiring. And I think that's important, is to recenter what your priorities are and not to get pulled into things that aren't your priorities. And when, they are tied to your job and things that you can't prevent, I still reclaim my time there too. You get this much of my effort, because guess what? White mediocrity is a thing, and they rise off of it. So if they put in 4% and expect promotion, I'm gonna put in 3%, expect promotion, because that's the bar you set.
So I just want to speak to it on an emotional justice level. So much of this moment, we've heard these words like this is a transformative moment. And I just want us to sit and honor how traumatizing this is for Black women, how profoundly traumatizing on multiple levels that speak to that sheer exhaustion. Multiple exhaustions, and let's literally name them. The exhaustion of literally being a Black woman on the front line, your very existence and being is on the front line. Your default position as a Black woman is on the front line. Some front line within your family, within your community, within your job, within your circle, within your place of worship. That's your default position. And then here comes the pandemic, raising everybody's blood pressure, and specifically Black women's, because so many of us are caretakers within our family, are looking after elders, dealing with homeschooling kids, navigating whatever other challenges are within a home, and then thinking about whatever the profession is. Add to that the exhaustion of so many of us who may be the essential workers. And I want to expand the notion of essential workers beyond how it's defined economically in nations, and talk about being an essential worker as a Black woman within our community. Because it is our emotional labor that feeds amplifies and affirms so many other people, where so few are turning around and who is saying to Black women, sis, what do you need? What can I do for you right now? Let me take one thing off your shoulder so that you can go have this space. So emotional justice, we say this, two things. One is you have to literally create a sacred circle that is just yours, that is about you every day. And to be realistic, it may be you can't do more than 5 or 10 minutes. Those 5 and 10 minutes, do one thing that is specifically about you. And I don't just mean you and your body, I mean you, your dreams. What is it that you want for yourself? To stand fully in your own body and just think, what do I want for me? Separate to family, spouses, profession, all of those things. But that is really, really important. If you can do it for longer, even better. If you can do it with a sister circle or girlfriends, even better. But maybe you can't, maybe that's not possible, but you can start by yourself 5 minutes every day. The other thing we've created, we're creating training with the Institute, specifically speaking to your point, sis, about white people wanting questions answered. They want something simple to do, basically to make themselves feel better about being white. That's really what it comes down to. And that's no Black woman's job ever in the world. But we've created a training program called Circle of Willingness. And Circle of Willingness is specifically for those white forward-thinking people who are asking the question, what can I do to help? What more do I need to understand? We created a specific 2-week e-learning course that answers that question and literally says to you the things to not do, which is to don't go ask your Black female friends this question. But we've created an e-learning course specifically for this space. The third part of it is, when I talk about negotiating relationships with multiple violences, one of those violences is that perpetual exhaustion. And that we have this, it's kind of like a bank account where there's only ever withdrawals. There's so little space for there to be a deposit. And so we have to become our own deposits for ourselves and deposits for each other, and carve out space. There is no other way to do it. And as we all know, there is too little resource about the well-being of Black women. And it is part of the reasons why. How do you center that? I ask every Black woman on this call that question. How can you tomorrow say, I'm gonna take those 10 minutes and make this just about me? It might be that I make a cup of tea, I sit in a chair, I put a do not disturb on the door, I tell somebody else to watch the kids, but I'm gonna do this for myself for 10 minutes and do it each day, or twice a week or 3 times a week, just to start the practice of centering yourself. Because so many of us don't realize how alien that is. We'll come on a call and speak about it, come off the call and go back to doing all the different things that we do and all the different layered ways that we do it. So that's what I encourage and affirm and challenge us to do. Take those 10 minutes, say this is my sacred circle, and what I'm doing for me and for me alone.
Yeah. Thank you. I saw Tracy trying to come in, so I want to give Tracy some time to speak.
Thank you, Cherisna. I appreciate that question. And because I work with college students, I want to highlight the notion that some of this also is about having conversations with younger people and starting at an early age, having conversations about their experience, recognizing that within this bigger theme, there are so many individual experiences. There's a diversity of experiences in the spectrum. So you can't any longer just say the Black experience, right? That there's this big spectrum and we're all in this space. One could be all the way to one end and someone else to the other. When I sit in spaces in my environment where we're talking about, okay, well, what do the Black students say about this? And I'm like, which ones? You can't just say there's just that one experience. And as the generations develop, I mean, we're in Gen Z now. When I talk to students who come with that perspective, even the generational differences have an impact on how they are interacting with these themes. And so I think a big part of it, when I think about that question about equipping Black women, I think about that mentorship and the storytelling that happens between. So for me, the conversations that I have with my mother, my aunts, my grandmothers when they were living, those are really powerful for me. And so I want to make sure we're cycling through that. Although my peer group is very important for me, that's a part of that support system that I need in order to equip myself. And I would highlight that as well. But I also think that those mentorship relationships really matter so that you can start to think about. I remember my father saying to me when I was going into the professional world, and he gave me some hard lessons that I really had to think about. And I was thinking, where is he coming from with this? But I remember talking about experiencing racism in graduate school. When I entered into the professional arena, he said, I recognize where you're at, but I want you to be prepared for something. And it's not comfortable for me to share this with you, but it will hurt you more when the stab in the back comes from someone who looks like you, right? Like, I needed him to have that conversation with me. I needed to be able to process what that looks like. And although it's not, a positive scenario, what was positive for it is that I was receiving preparation. I was receiving the kind of real talk that I needed to equip myself. And I needed to have those conversations with people I trusted. And I recognize that not everybody will get that. So what I would be reaching out to the audience is saying, when you see young people preparing themselves, whether they have the capital to do so or not, that is a responsibility that we can embark upon in order to do that. So that preparation for that real talk, that generational difference matters, and just acknowledging the diversity within us, but also claiming the power in names, the power in who you are. So if my personality looks different than Tanisha's personality, that's okay. That's what it's supposed to be. That's how it's supposed to be. I don't need to tailor myself to be what I think Black women are supposed to be. That's not self-identification. It is who I am. What are my leadership skills? What's my personality? And how does that move within a space and be comfortable in it? I've recognized, for me, my comfort really came in my late 30s. I'm sure that that's different for everybody based on all the background experiences and things that they get. But, I really feel like that part is very important to add to that part of the conversation.
Thank you for that. And so as we talk about resources, and I want to also acknowledge that there in the comments, we have listed so many resources there that's available that reflects the work of some of our panelists. So please be paying attention to that. But I want to take this opportunity now for this big debut, our big announcement in terms of resources for the hour. Esther, you mentioned, many people are saying this is a transformative moment, but our reality is, for Black women, this is a very traumatizing and exhausting hour. And it is important that Black women are able to name that. And I also think it's important that Black women are able to find refuge in this hour. And so I am excited to announce that Scarritt Bennett Center has entered a partnership with Beyonce Mass, Yolanda Norton's organization, and the Institute of Emotional Justice, Esther Armah's organization. And the three of us will collaborate to host Salama Circles that will actually be debuted August 19th. And I want to invite Esther, Yolanda, to share more about what Salama Circles are. And Esther, if you would do the call around the global call for Black women. Yolanda, talk to us about what Salama Circles are.
So salama is the Swahili word for peace, for safety, and it lives kind of linguistically in tandem with this word shalom. It is about, and so these Salama circles are about us feeling the need to provide safe space, sacred space, space of rest for Black women. So we have collectively developed a 4-part curriculum. So over the next 4 months, we will have sessions once a month that will deal with issues of grief, joy, pleasure, and the superwoman complex, right? And so what we want to do is engender a kind of conversation we're going to engage artists from across the globe. We're going to engage clinicians from across the globe to engender a kind of conversation about how Black women experience these 4 things, and what are some resources and tools that we can develop to more healthily address the ways that these things pop up in the world. So we're really excited about having these healing spaces that's for Black women. So this is not a Facebook Live event. This is an event that requires registration. This exists in the vein of Lynn Westfield's Sister Circles, right? So there's these sacred set-aside spaces that are just for us, created by us for our thriving.
You're muted.
Sorry, I got so excited listening to Yolanda, I forgot to unmute. And so we are inviting you from the four corners of the globe. I'm sitting here in Accra. We welcome our sisters from the continent, from the west, the east, the north, the south, the central. Talking to our sisters across Europe. I know that sisters in London are like, sis, when is this happening? What is happening? So to our Black British sisters, to those in the Caribbean, it is a global call for us to gather together, to stand in sacred space and do work that is for, about, and with our best selves, our well-being, our healing in mind. We do it through storytelling. There will be artists, poetry, experts who bring these different perspectives, offering us a whole range of tools in the extraordinary way that Black women offer tools. So we offer tools in community, in conversation, in creativity. And so it is a global call. And so we invite you to honor that call. I think there's details on the Facebook page for how you should register, but register now because it's like 100 limit, and we know we're going to get more than 100 for every single month. To the sisters who talked about exhaustion and grief, there's a beautiful article today by Breonna Taylor's sister, also speaking to some of the other family members of those who are grieving, talking about the challenge of dealing with a public, how your family members become this public figure and you are intimately grieving somebody that you love. Grief matters, Black grief matters, Black women's grief matters. We've heard a conversation about pleasure and the importance of pleasure politics. And so from the four corners of the globe, we invite you to join us, to engage, to be affirmed, to conversate, as you will say, and to gather.
Thank you. I want to invite you sisters, Black women all over the globe, as you're watching this, do not wait. Register today. The link has been included in the post. Someone asked what time, and time, scheduling it around the time was the big issue because this is a global call for women all over in the different time zones was our biggest challenge in doing this. So if you go to the link, you'll be able to see all of the listed time zones for this August 19th. Again, we invite all Black women. This is a private Black woman space that will not be Facebook Live because Black women deserve our own sacred space to commune, to be together, to heal, to learn from one another, to affirm one another's experiences. And so that's what this is, Salama Circle. I invite you today, and don't be selfish about this good news. Come on and share it with other sisters who need sacred space to just be. We invite you to register. Again, the link is posted in the comment sections of this Facebook Live, but we also will have it on our website, or all three of our website and our social media. So we want to invite you again to register for Salama Circles. Our kickoff is August 19th. I want to say thank you all to every last one of you for such a rich conversation, the ways in which you have really helped us to really just experience a dose of what it's like when sisters come together. I mean, I'm just sitting here like, y'all, we could do this all day. So I want to take this time now to offer you an opportunity to share closing words as we depart this space. But before we do that, again, I want to just say to each of you, Dr. Moultrie, Tanisha Smith, Tracy Ray, and our organizing partners, Esther Armah and Yolanda Norton, thank you for such rich content and such a rich experience here today. Tracy Ray, I want to start with you. How do you, or what parting words do you offer the sisters who are watching today?
Thank you for that, Cherisna, and thank you all. I've learned, and every time we have these spaces, I learn so much, and I appreciate the value that you place in storytelling and story exchange. I would really, it's on my heart right now because I feel like, and I'm not sure if that's what's happening, but this is what's on my heart, is speaking to younger women who are really trying to find their identity and tackling just that with all the things happening globally. So there's something in my spirit that says to speak to that particular group, because I'm thinking about when I was developing as a young woman and coming into from my late teens into my 20s, and how much stimulus there was. And I can only imagine that on top of a pandemic, on top of all these other things that are happening, and what that is like for young people right now. And I know we'll cover some other things, but for me, I think my parting comments are to really identify with where your support systems are, and don't sit silently in spaces where you don't have that. And I hope that they find through your website, through all the other things that have been shared today, that they find support. But that's what's on my spirit. I'm speaking through that space, and not the academic space or the technical space. I'm speaking through my emotional space, and that I feel like there's so much happening right now. And Esther, I think, said it before, that if we don't acknowledge what we need, no one's really going to get that for us. And so I really want to lift up folks to really get what it is that they need. And if there's anything I'm sure any of us on the panel could do to support anyone, but I'm speaking to young people who might be on this, I really want to kind of keep the door open for that. So those would be the last parting comments that I have, because they are coming from a space of really, connecting to where people could be at today in this moment that doesn't feel very light. And how do you find that light with all that's going on? So I really want to kind of lift that up. There's not weakness in needing help, not weakness in needing support. There's not weakness in using the tools. And that's oftentimes something for us that is not highlighted. So I think that's what I would say as my parting statement. It has been a pleasure. And yeah, thank you. Thank you again for inviting me, Cherisna.
Tracy Ray, thank you so much for your parting words as it relates to young women and mentorship and support. Thank you again for being here. Really appreciate it. Tanisha Smith, my Black girl personified, that's who you are to me. Would you share your parting words as we leave this space?
I was just glancing at the comments, and I saw a lot of Black women saying, I'm so tired. And I can identify with that. I came into quarantine and didn't realize until I had to slow down how empty I was. And I had to have a come to Jesus self in every mighty moment and say, you have got to reclaim your time, or you're going to lose yourself, literally. And it has been a fight, because we as Black women, we've taught people that they're entitled to our time. And my brilliant best friend, because I was like, I'm running into all these roadblocks. People are coming at me all kinds of ways because I'm choosing myself and I'm moving different. And she said, no one is entitled to your time. And I want to reiterate what Monique said, and Esther, I believe you did say that taking at least just 5 minutes to yourself. It is so important. I did not realize how empty I was and how much I was giving and not receiving until I had to be still. And I think a lot of us are feeling that. We just can't identify why we are feeling that. But sis, you need to fill yourself up. And so I think that my parting words would be for the Black women who are on this chat and who in the comments saying they're tired. Take Esther's advice and take those moments, if it's just 5 minutes, just to center and ground yourself each day. Because if you do not, your body and your mind will make you slow down. So I just want you all to just take that time to care for yourselves. Thank you. And thank you for this opportunity, Cherisna. I love you so much. I just feel like Cherisna is a gift to this world. And I'm so grateful for you and all that you do. And thank you for thinking of me.
Thank you, Tanisha Smith, with the prophetic call to reclaim your time. Thank you so much, Tanisha. I really appreciate you being here. Dr. Monique Moultrie, you have a whole lot going on. We put a lot of your links already on the post, but won't you share with us, with your closing comments, some of the projects you're working on and how people can reach you?
Sure. Thank you again for this space and for giving me an audience and people to talk to. I've been quarantining in Boston by myself. So this is more people than I've talked to in 9 months. So I'm real excited. I was in Boston because I was working on a book project on Black lesbian religious leaders and activism, really centered around what do we do with this multiple oppressions that we feel and how do we face those. The new project I have now that the book is done, praises be, is I'm starting a project on Black child-free women and the messages they receive about family and how they construct notions of family. So if you are a Black woman who does not have children or doesn't want children, Team No Kids over here, please join me for a conversation. The link is there. And I would say my closing message is the morning mantra that I actually give myself each morning. I wake up each day and I say, what am I free to do? And who am I free to be today? And every morning I look myself in the mirror and I say, I'm free to be all that I am. And that will be enough. And I work throughout the day to not let anything stop me from pursuing that freedom. And so, sisters, I hope that you do the same, that we work together for the work of freedom for each other.
Doctor, I almost called you Reverend. Dr. Monique Moultrie, thank you so much. All of her links, information for her book, information about her research is posted on our comment section. So we want to encourage you to stay in contact with Monique Moultrie. Thank you again so much for being with us. Yolanda Norton, we're so great. I'm excited about this partnership. With your parting words for the women who heard the call and have not yet registered, come on and share with them the good news.
So I'll say two things. The first is simply this. I echo everything that my sisters have said here. People don't deserve your time, and they also don't deserve your brilliance. So if you are in spaces where you are not being honored, where you are not being affirmed, cared for, or seen, find freedom in walking away. Because you are brilliant enough, you are talented enough that there is someone who needs and wants what you have to offer. And so do not stay in personal or professional spaces that can't honor you and your brilliance as a Black woman and as an individual. So that's the first thing that I would say. And I would say now is the time that we have to be intentional about finding our healing, our rest, and our rejuvenation. If not now, then when? I think we have seen generations of our foremothers get sick and die carrying this load. And if we're going to model something different for the future and be something different in the present, then we have to be very intentional about finding the spaces that are committed to our thriving.
I'm on mute. Yolanda Norton with Beyonce Mass, thank you so much for such great wisdom and for this collaboration, this work that I really feel called to in this honor with you. I'm honored to sit at the table with you, my sister. I'm so excited about this work. Esther Armah, listen, I'm in love with you. No, I'm so in love with you and all that you're doing. As we close this space, share for the sister who has not registered the good news.
So I want to start here, though, to all of my sisters on this call. It is okay if you're not okay. It is okay if you're not okay. I want to say to my sisters, hold on. Hold on. this moment that is so full of trauma and pain that others are defining as amazing and transformative, and that feels like a weight on your back. Hold on, because what we are here to do is to hold each other up and to find our way through. It is literally our global Black woman inheritance. It is what has been passed down to us from foremothers upon foremothers upon foremothers. But we also have to honor the fact that in our exhaustion, in this moment that is demanding and pulling so much from us, that we don't want to look in the mirror and say, you know what, today I am not okay. So maybe in that first moment, that's what you give yourself permission to do, is to look in the mirror and say, you know what, today I'm not okay. So I'm going to do something for 10 minutes to make me feel better in this 10 minutes. We don't have to have some extraordinary, explosive moment, come to Jesus moment where everything is resolved. But we need to find those moments where we can look at the image of ourselves, literally the image of God, and say, today I'm going to hold on. And when you hold on, know that there are sisters in Ghana, in London, in Amsterdam, in Jamaica, in Brazil, in New York, in New Orleans, in Nashville. There are other sisters holding on right beside you. And if we reach out, you may not feel their hands in flesh, but spiritually, they are holding on right beside you. And it matters that we say that. It matters that we give ourselves permission to say the things that nobody ever gives us permission to say. So come to the Salama circles and make space. Let that be your gift to yourself. Register, know that for the next 4 months, I'm going to carve out time and make this for me and for us. Holding on can take all kinds of forms and frames, but know that there is a river, there is an ocean, and there is an army of Black women all over the world that have their hand on the small of your back saying, sister, we got you. Hold on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Esther, for those beautiful words, but also for saying yes to this collaboration, to this partnership, to this sisterhood. I am honored to be at the table with you as we usher into as we usher women all over the globe into a space of healing and freedom. Thank you. To all of our viewers this afternoon, again, I want to say thank you for joining us this afternoon as we commune together. Healing is never just individual. Healing is always communal. And so we invite you, sisters, Black women, all over the globe to join us for communal healing. The healing is not just about us and our generation. The healing is about generations to come. That is our work in dismantling white supremacy. That is our work in dismantling patriarchy. It's to heal so that we might walk and live in a world where we are healed and free. So if you have not already, I encourage you to register that we might be together, communing together as we usher each other into a place of healing and freedom, not just for us, but for our daughters and granddaughters and next generations to come. Thank you again for joining us. And before we leave this space, I want to celebrate brown girls all over the world, Black girls all over the world. So here is a song dedicated to you to remind you that even when the world hates your skin, we are created in the image and likeness of God. God was intentional about coloring your skin Black. And so here's a song to you to celebrate your skin, to celebrate your very being. God bless you and keep you. Here's a song for you, my sister.